In Vedic times, we honored the third gender. All the countries that the British colonized, homosexuality is either a criminal offense, even a death penalty attached to it. Historically, it wasn't like that. It was very common to have lesbian relationships, gay relationships. If we look at our temples in different places, they are very commonly depicted. So whether it was gender identity or sexual orientation, all of it was honored. And it was only with the invasions that things got diluted and a certain amount of homophobia crept in. And of course, with the law that the British passed. That's how society regressed. Ancient times were very supportive. My guru says that consciousness itself is half Shiva, half Shakti, which is the depiction of consciousness, is non-binary with the pronouns he, she, they, them. And so that is really honored in Vedic times.
Today is our first episode featuring an LGBTQIA plus ally, Anuradha Gupta. And you are in for a real treat today because Anuradha is one of the fiercest LGBTQIA plus advocates that I know of. So if you need a prime example of what an active ally looks like, look no further than my friend, Anuradha Gupta.
Stevie, it's great to be back with you. We did the story time a few years back. You really walk the talk. You are the best advocate that I know, and you inspire us all. Your representation and everything that you stand for. My kid came out to me when she was 10 and she's 23 now. My kids joke that I started doing the coming out for her because I realized that it's hard. Things are just not fair. They're not equal. And that we have a long way to go. We need to fight. And I started finding out slowly about ways to advocate, groups that I could talk to parents with, like free mom hugs. And then I started finding out about laws and then nonprofits. Just my kid coming out with her trepidation, that made me realize that there's so much I can do.
And not to put you on the spot here, but I know that there was a law called Section 377. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So that law blocked homosexuality or made homosexuality illegal in India for many years. When was that law implemented?
So this law was implemented in 1839 by the British, and actually in what we call the Commonwealth countries, all the countries that the British colonized, homosexuality is a criminal offense. With this, society regressed.
Growing up, you had this friend that really was kind of legally forced to be closeted in India at the time. So when your daughter came out when she was 10 years old, even though you supported your friend back then, you weren't really gung-ho, like fierce LGBT advocate at the time because you hadn't necessarily understood all of the LGBT struggle, so to speak. Can you talk a little bit about that, like transformation for you?
It never occurred to me that this was a criminal offense. And it was only when I moved to the US and when my kid came out, that's when I realized that I actually didn't know too many LGBTQIA plus people growing up. And that's because it was a criminal offense. Even when my daughter, at the age of 10, she said, I'm going to fight for our rights. And I said, you have all the rights. I had no clue. And that's what happens to so many of us. We just have no idea, till we have a friend or, a family member who comes out to us. We have no idea. Now I'm so aware. Now I'm fighting for trans kids. Now I'm fighting for, gender affirming care. But 13 years back, I knew nothing. And I just wish more people were aware about how LGBTQIA plus rights are, how women's rights were. If we were to regress and walk back to the dark ages, I think in some ways we are getting there right now.
Yes, with these over 600 plus anti-LGBT bills with no stopping in sight, unfortunately. This is happening on a global scale. It's not just here in the United States. It gives me chills down my spine that all the indigenous cultures around the globe, not just in India, all of them inherently recognized this expansive nature of gender and sexuality way before we even had the modern terms that we have now, like gay, lesbian, bisexual. Those weren't necessarily terms in those days. LGBT people basically have existed since time immemorial in all cultures, regardless of what the British have tried to do to suppress knowledge and awareness of our lived experiences. There's a lot to explore in this area for anybody interested in Hinduism. This is, as we say with yoga and dharmic practice in general, it is a lifelong practice of discovery. I know you're also a yoga teacher, you're an Ayurvedic practitioner. Can you talk about a yogic and Ayurvedic view of, how LGBTQ plus people can use these ancient tools to help themselves heal? Because I talked a little bit about it in my initial episode. Yoga has been just tremendously healing for me personally, growing up in the Christian tradition. And I think it is a powerhouse of healing. It's a powerhouse practice for human liberation. And so wondering if you can talk a little bit about that for those that may not necessarily be familiar with yoga, how it can be beneficial for those of us in the LGBTQ plus community.
I was just talking to some students yesterday about the 4 goals of yoga, Ayurveda, Vedic practices. So one is dharma, which is to fulfill your duty. And then there's earth, which is to have a material existence, kama, which is to enjoy life, and then moksha, which is freedom. And all our practices are supposed to be freeing. We are very tied down to our identity, to who we are, but that journey of discovery actually sets us free. Who are we? What is human existence about? And the tools that yoga provides for all of it, whether it's the practice of postures or just withdrawing the senses, inquiry and meditation, I think that's really so useful. And these are evidence-based techniques to release trauma, to make people accept themselves better, to not be tossed around by other people's opinions or rocked by circumstances. And, Harvard studies have shown that 8 weeks of meditation can change the gray matter of the brain, making you more centered. Yeah, which is what we need in current times. I mean, everybody faces rejection sometimes in their life, but to have consistently this political message out there, right, which a lot of youth face, like questioning their existence. They just want to tune it out. I mean, the kids I talk to in GSA clubs, they want to tune it out. It's likely that at home, people may not be accepting. And so many, 30% of LGBTQ kids are rendered homeless. And how do they stay strong? I mean, if they have some kind of practice, whether it be art or be yoga, it's all about connecting with the self. As far as Ayurveda goes, it's a form of holistic medicine. And we believe strongly that this is who you are. Just that sentence settles a person down. This is who you are. Now, how can you fulfill your potential?
Absolutely.
And in fulfilling your potential, there's, of course, how do you manage the mind? How do you manage the body? And do a preventive regimen? How do you manage imbalances? And how do you deal with your community and your society and all those subtle, overt, covert messages and stay strong and centered? So even the definition of health in yoga and Ayurveda is swasthya, to be centered in the self.
Hey, QST listeners. If you're enjoying this conversation thus far, I encourage you to head on over to the QST Community Patreon to dive deeper and listen to the full version of this episode. These full episodes are only available on Patreon, where becoming a patron starts at only $5 per month. By joining the QST Community Patreon, not only will you get access to extended ad-free episodes, you'll also receive access to the full archive of prior QST episodes, and you'll also be directly supporting the work that goes into maintaining this podcast, which helps us keep these vital conversations moving forward. Plus, depending on your membership level, you may get access to other perks like behind-the-scenes content or even access to our global queer community connections group that will meet monthly, where we work towards both personal and communal growth via supportive self-care practices in a loving and affirming environment. So if you're ready to dive in, head on over to www.patreon.com/QST, the podcast community, and become a member today. Genuinely, your support means the world to me and to every single person gaining knowledge and insight listening to this podcast. I can't wait to continue this journey with you. I'll see you there.